What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back for the free agency of 2022 for the Seattle Kraken. Now, yes, free agency has been open for a couple of weeks as of now, so I apologize for getting this out a little bit later and not right as the Kraken made some of their big signings on the first day. But summer's been busy, and, well, the Kraken have been busy too over the last couple of weeks. Of course, there was also the prospect training camp in which Matty Beniers in particular put on quite a bit of a show, and looks like he is more than ready to potentially lead a first line for this team going into his first full season in, well, games 11 through the rest of his career. And on top of that, the Kraken also made a decently big trade, or at least big for them anyway, certainly the biggest trade, at least as far as I can think anyway, that the Kraken have made to this point in the franchise's history, picking up Oliver Bjorkstrand, which, again, while it's nothing like a Matthew Tkachuk trade or anything like that, it's still one that will probably impact the top six for the Kraken on the forward end in this coming season. But when it comes to that trade and what those potential lines could end up looking like with all the additions the Kraken have made, we're going to save that for a future video, and in this one, just focus on the guys that the Kraken picked up in free agency. Now, I could save the best for last, but it seems only fair, since I've kept you waiting too long for this video to come out anyway, that we just jump right into it with the biggest signing the Kraken made during free agency, at least so far anyway, and likely to stay that way as we get deeper into it. That, of course, being Andre Burkovsky of the Colorado Avalanche. The Kraken end up picking up Burkovsky on a 5-year, $5.5 million per year deal that, again, will keep him in Seattle now for the next few years, where he's very likely to at least start out on the top 6, maybe even the top 3 for the Kraken. It is maybe worth mentioning with Burkovsky that while most of us were very excited to see the Kraken pick him up, there were some that were kind of hoping Seattle would stay away from him for fear of what his contract could end up looking like. That having been said, 5 by 5.5 seems pretty fair for what Burkovsky can offer the Kraken. He is a 27-year-old left winger, a former first-round pick, 23rd overall from the Washington Capitals, where he spent the first 5 years of his career before spending the last 3 in Colorado. In the 8 years that he's played at least some in the NHL, he's played in 519 games where he has 295 points, 123 goals, and 172 assists. So, not necessarily points production that blows your hair back or anything like that, but it is worth mentioning that he did see a significant increase in that points production once he came to Colorado over these last 3 years, where he got a significant jump also in time on ice. And when he comes to the Kraken, where he's likely to see maybe even another step up, hopefully he can continue that trend upwards. Now, it is also, again, worth mentioning there that Colorado puts up a lot more points than the Kraken do, at least at this point in time anyway. But again, with more time on ice, he might at least be able to equal what he was able to do last year, which was better than anybody the Kraken had, where he had 61 points on 22 goals and 39 assists, all career highs. And again, those 61 points being 11 higher than the highest Kraken, that being Jared McCann. And also, for what it's worth, as you can see, the advanced stats, especially the possession ones, especially like the way that Burkovsky plays the game, at least at the offensive end anyway, where with his Corsi for percentage, he's only once finished a season below 50 there, and the vast majority of the time is well above 50, ending with that career 56.8 so far. And then expected plus minus, again, a similar story there, just 2 years in the negative, that negative 2.2 coming in the same year, that last year in Washington, where he wasn't as good at the Corsi, but in the last couple of years has again offered quite a bit when it comes to expected goals over expected goals against. With that all having been said, the weakness in his game is certainly on the defensive end, where, at least this last season, he definitely left a little bit to be desired in the defensive end when he was on the ice. Still though, he's mostly coming to the Kraken to help them do one thing, and that is put the puck in the net more often than they did last year. And he certainly, again, will get a chance to do that, where in Colorado, he was mostly stuck on the third line as a 7th forward, occasionally getting up into the top 6, where in Seattle, he's certainly going to be in the top 6 more often than not. And like I said, there's a good chance he could be on that first line. Plus, for what it's worth, he has won a cup now in each of the last 2 places he's played. So I guess that means the Kraken are guaranteed to win a cup sometime in the next 5 years. Yeah, pretty sure that's how it works. The next biggest signing the Kraken made during free agency, again so far and certainly not as big, would be Justin Schultz on the defensive end, as the Kraken were pretty much guaranteed, it sounded like, to add at least one right shot defenseman. And while a lot of people thought that could be Klingberg, it ends up being Schultz, which does come a lot cheaper than Klingberg would have, as Schultz ends up signing for the Kraken on a 2-year, $3 million per year deal. Like Burkovsky, also a 2-time Cup winner, though for Schultz, both of his came with Pittsburgh instead of 2 different teams, and he's also obviously not a reigning Cup winner. But still, the 32-year-old, again, right shot defenseman, has now played in 10 different NHL seasons, in which he's totaled 602 games played, with 264 points on 57 goals and 207 assists. So, again, for a defenseman, especially a right shot one, pretty decent points production over the course of his career, though it has started to peter off here a little bit over the last few seasons, even with one of those being a shortened season. And although, again, like Burkovsky, the advanced stats definitely like the way he plays the game, especially the possession part of things, where his career Corsi 4 is still a 52.7 and consistently above 50 over the last few seasons, and even expected plus minus, he is constantly positive there. Really, his career 2.2 only dragged down by the second year in the league. At this point, especially last season, he was pretty much a replacement level player in almost all aspects of the game. That all except for one, and that was his ability to set up goals and get primary assists. And it's there, at least in part anyway, as to the reason why the Kraken were willing to pay him $3 million per year for the next 2 seasons to be basically a replacement level player in his 30s. For one thing, he does add a little bit more of a veteran presence to the defensive end, and again, he's a right shot defenseman, which is harder to come by, especially in this year's free agency class, and the Kraken needed help on that right side depth-wise. But even outside of all of those things, the one thing he can offer the Kraken that they really needed help with was experience quarterbacking a power play. And yeah, again, as we've mentioned a few times, the Kraken power play can use all the help it can get. Now sure, a guy like John Klingberg probably could have filled that role even better than Schultz could have, but would have done so for a much higher price. And if the Kraken ended up going with Schultz, I'd have to think that that probably means they tested the waters with Klingberg and just determined that whatever was going to tempt him out of Dallas was going to be way too high for them. And so that's why Schultz ends up coming over instead of Klingberg, who was highly rumored to potentially be on his way to Seattle. And yes, as of when I'm recording this, Klingberg is still unsigned, so I guess it's still possible the Kraken could pick him up, but I would say it's pretty unlikely at this point. Although I have already been wrong twice about a couple of things. One, that the signings the Kraken made and the trade they made would mean that Ryan Donato didn't come back, and as we'll get to, I was wrong about that. And I was also wrong about the fact that I didn't think the Kraken would be going for another goaltender in free agency. Instead, they do end up picking up a goaltender, that being Martin Jones. Which, yeah, I'm not too sure about this one or how it's going to go. If anything, this just signals that the Kraken were not terribly convinced that Joey Decord was ready for the NHL, even as a backup, which he would have had to be to Grubauer, or they just didn't want to put the entire season on Grubauer and won somebody that could split a little bit more time than Decord would have been ready for. And of course, now that the Kraken once again have 3 uninjured NHL level goaltenders, again remembering that Drieger is out until at least February if not March with his injury, does mean that with Decord also that while he's on an RFA deal, he would have to clear waivers before getting down to the AHL, as he's no longer waiver exempt. Now, the fact that the Kraken brought in Jones, again signaling that Decord might not be ready for the NHL, might also mean that they think that they can get him through waivers back down to the AHL, which is possible if he's in fact not ready, and he didn't really play all that well in his limited chances last year at the NHL level. But still, I'm not terribly convinced that he would get through waivers. He had a fantastic season at the AHL level last year and is still relatively young for a goaltender. And while he would have to be on an NHL roster if a team was going to pick him up via waivers, and that's not going to happen on a contending team, I think there's still some rebuilding type teams that might take a chance on picking up a guy and sticking him as the backup on their NHL roster, if he has as much promise as he showed at the AHL level last year. Regardless, though, of what ends up happening with Decord, one thing is for certain, and that is that the Kraken did need goaltender depth. I just thought that they might go for someone they could have at the AHL level that they wouldn't have to worry about waivers with and have Decord as the backup. Instead, they're going with the two proven NHL goaltenders and then hoping that Decord can get down to the AHL, still a part of the Kraken organization. Of course, saying NHL level goaltenders, obviously we know Grubauer didn't have the best year last year and we're hoping for a bounce back season there, and he definitely will go in as the starter. Or pretty close to definitely anyway. I guess I could be wrong about that. With Jones, it's been a rough few years for him. He did have, I guess, a pretty decent season in Philadelphia, where goaltending has been a bit of an issue outside of a couple of decent seasons from Carter Hart, but again, not a place that goaltenders go to thrive typically. Still, before this last year in Philadelphia, while he did have 3 fantastic years for the Sharks, getting them deep into the playoffs in a couple of those seasons, the 3 years that followed that and happened more recently before going to Philadelphia, let's just say the Shark fans among the Kraken fan base know all too well the frustration of watching Martin Jones play goaltender. And that certainly does bear itself out pretty clearly in his stats, where the now 32-year-old goaltender, as you can see, has played in 9 NHL seasons, with those 2 very good, especially his rookie year, very good in LA. And then the 6 years with the Sharks split right down the middle, with those first 3 well above the 900 mark in the 19s all 3 seasons, even getting Vezina votes in the first 2 of those. And then the last 3 years, an 896 in all 3 of them, which, again, as we know, is not necessarily what you're hoping for from your starting goaltender. Granted, Jones isn't going to be the Kraken starting goaltender and wasn't last year in Philadelphia, where he did manage to bring that back up above the 900 line, or at least right to 900, but still a 3.42 goals against average leaves something to be desired. It does also maybe point out just how rough of a season the Flyers had this last season, that he could have a 900 save percentage and go up that much in his goals against average from the year before, but still. Oh, and I guess since I forgot to mention it, the Kraken do end up signing Jones to just a 1-year, $2 million deal, so it's not terribly high risk, assuming they don't lose Decord. Really, the biggest risk of this signing of Jones is the possibility of losing Decord if they try to waive him and get him down to the AHL and end up losing him. Aside from those 3, the Kraken did actually sign a number of other players during this free agency period, though the rest of them were pretty much all AHL level players, as the Kraken did have to actually fill out that roster of the Coachella Valley Firebirds for their inaugural season. Really, the only 2, I guess, exceptions to that would be one, John Hayden, who is actually an NHL contract that the Kraken signed, though it's a minimum one, and he's a depth forward that probably won't see terribly a ton of time for the Kraken, and if he does, almost entirely 4th line minutes. And then the other one being the surprise re-signing, very pleasant surprise, but the surprise re-signing nonetheless, of Ryan Donato to a 1-year, $1.2 million deal. Something that, especially after, again, that trade that brought Bjorkstrand to the Kraken, didn't seem like it was going to happen. But again, since he had made it to free agency, not getting that qualifying offer on his RFA deal, the Kraken managed to bring him back as an unrestricted free agent. And since we're on the subject of signing contracts anyway, I suppose it's also worth mentioning that the Kraken did end up getting Morgan Geekie re-signed. That's a 1-year, $1.4 million deal where he will again be an RFA at the end of this next season. And they also got the entry-level contract signed for Shane Wright. That happening on the ice at the end of that prospect training camp. There are still a couple of guys out there available in free agency that I wouldn't have hated to see the Kraken take a chance on, if nothing else as depth guys on the forward end, namely Evan Rodriguez and Sonny Milano, both of whom had fantastic, at least starts to their season last year, and were both pretty surprising guys like Donato that weren't offered qualifying deals on their RFA contracts, both of whom still currently UFAs and could be picked up. But for the Kraken, especially on the forward end, I think they're pretty much done for their free agent moves, at least in the offseason here. There's still maybe a chance that they could pick up another guy, maybe two, on the defensive end as added depth, where right now there isn't a ton of depth past the 6 guys they have rostered at the NHL level. There's obviously Cale Fleury, and if Riker Evans is available to go, that certainly helps as well. But if Riker isn't quite yet ready for the NHL, and I don't know if you want to lean fully on Cale Fleury as your only 7th defenseman, then yeah, they maybe could use one more guy for defensive depth. Otherwise, I think we have just about reached the end of this one, so let me know what you think down in the comment section, how you think the Kraken did in this free agency class now that you've had a couple of weeks to sit on it. If there's any guys that the Kraken didn't pick up that you would have liked to see them get, obviously Gaudreau wasn't going to happen. He wanted to go to the East Coast and Columbus for some reason. But either way, some of the guys that you would have liked to see the Kraken get, or maybe still potentially get, that are out there and available. Otherwise, if you have made it to this point, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget, we will be talking about that Bjorkstrand trade and where all of these moves leave the Kraken lineup looking like going into the season in a video to come out shortly. But until then, next time, whenever that is, stay safe out there, be good to each other, God bless, and go Kraken.